Maya Carter, a single mother struggling to make ends meet, serves wealthy patrons at an upscale restaurant every day, her warm smile hiding the weight of her burdens. Among the regulars is Edward Langston, a silent and mysterious man who dines alone at the same table daily. Over time, Maya forms an unspoken bond with him, their brief exchanges a small comfort in her difficult life. As the restaurant's renovations loom and Maya faces the loss of her job, she continues to serve Mr. Langston, unaware of the life-changing secret he's harboring. On her last day, he hands her a sealed envelope with a request that will alter the course of her future forever. But when Maya goes to thank him the next day, she discovers a truth that will leave her reeling. The Last Table is a powerful, emotional story of love, loss, and the unexpected ways our lives can be touched by the kindness of others. Get ready for a heart-wrenching tale that will stay with you long after the final page is turned. Chapter 1, The Daily Grind. Scene 1, Early Morning Routine. The shrill beep of the alarm clock cut through the stillness of the early morning, jolting Maya awake. She groaned softly, reaching out to silence the persistent sound. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the thin curtains. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her like a heavy blanket. It was another day, another struggle. Maya glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. She had exactly 30 minutes before she needed to get Jaden up and ready for school. With a deep breath, she pushed herself out of bed and padded quietly into the small kitchen. The apartment was modest, but it was home, filled with small signs of their life together, a few family photos on the wall, Jaden's drawings proudly displayed on the fridge. As she began preparing breakfast, the familiar routine brought her a sense of comfort. She cracked a few eggs into the pan, the sizzle of the oil filling the silence. A smile tugged at her lips as she thought of Jaden, still fast asleep in the next room. He was the light of her life, the reason she pushed through each day despite the weariness that seemed to cling to her bones. "Morning, Mama," a small voice called from the doorway. Jaden, still in his pajamas, stood there rubbing his eyes, a sleepy smile on his face. "Good morning, baby," Maya replied, her voice soft and warm. "Did you sleep well?" Jaden nodded, climbing up onto the chair at the small kitchen table. "I had a dream about dinosaurs. We were in a jungle, and they were huge." Maya chuckled, turning to face him as she placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "Dinosaurs, huh? Sounds like quite the adventure." As Jaden began to eat, Maya leaned against the counter, sipping a cup of coffee. She watched him, her heart swelling with love and determination. No matter how hard things got, she would do whatever it took to give him a better life. "Mama, do you have to work late again today?" Jaden asked, his small voice laced with concern. Maya sighed, reaching out to ruffle his curly hair. "I do, sweetheart, but I promise I'll be home as soon as I can. And we can read that new book you got from the library, okay?" Jaden smiled, nodding eagerly. "Okay. I can't wait." As they finished breakfast, the clock ticked closer to 6:30 a.m. Maya helped Jaden get dressed, tying his shoes and making sure his backpack was ready for school. By the time they were out the door, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the city. With a quick kiss on his forehead, Maya sent Jaden off to catch the school bus, watching as he waved goodbye with a bright smile. She stood there for a moment, letting the cool morning air wake her up fully. Then, with a deep breath, she turned and headed to the bus stop herself, ready to face another long day at the restaurant. Scene 2, The Restaurant. The restaurant buzzed with the usual morning rush as Maya walked through the back entrance, tying her apron around her waist. The elegant ambience of the place always struck her as a sharp contrast to her modest life. Dark wood furnishings, soft lighting, and large windows offering a view of the bustling city streets created an atmosphere of sophistication that she sometimes felt out of place in. "Morning, Maya," greeted one of her fellow waitresses, Sarah, with a smile as she passed by. "Morning, Sarah, Maya replied, returning the smile despite the tiredness that clung to her. She made her way to the front, where her station was located, and began preparing for the day. The first wave of customers had already begun to trickle in, businessmen in suits, couples enjoying breakfast, and the regulars she had come to know by sight if not by name. At precisely 7:30 a.m., the familiar figure of Mr. Edward Langston walked through the door. He was tall and slender, his silver hair neatly combed back, and he always dressed impeccably in tailored suits. Maya watched as he made his way to his usual table by the window, where he sat every morning without fail. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," Maya greeted him warmly as she approached his table. He looked up, offering a polite nod. "Good morning, Maya. The usual, please." Maya smiled, jotting down the order she already knew by heart. "Right away." As she walked back to the kitchen, she couldn't help but think about how little she knew about Mr. Langston, despite serving him nearly every day for the past year. He was a man of few words, always sitting alone, quietly observing the world outside the window. Yet, there was something about him, an air of sadness that clung to him, much like the weariness that clung to her. Maya brought out his coffee in a small plate of pastries, placing them gently in front of him. "Here you go, Mr. Langston. Let me know if you need anything else." He gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, Maya." Their interactions were brief, but they held a certain unspoken connection. Maya often wondered what brought him to the restaurant every day, sitting alone at the same table, ordering the same meal. But she never asked, respecting his privacy. As the morning rush continued, Maya moved from table to table, serving customers with the same warm smile, despite the exhaustion that weighed on her. She couldn't afford to let it show, not when she needed this job to support Jaden. Every tip counted, every extra shift meant a little more security for her son's future. Scene 3, Struggles and Sacrifices. It was during a short break that Maya found a moment to herself. She stepped into the back room, pulling out her phone to check the time. Her heart sank as she noticed a notification for an overdue bill. She sighed, rubbing her temples as the familiar stress settled over her. "Everything okay?" Sarah's voice broke through her thoughts. Maya looked up, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just, the usual. Bills piling up, trying to keep up with everything." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I hear you. It's tough out there. And with the renovation plans coming up." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Renovation plans?" Sarah frowned slightly. "Yeah, didn't you hear? They're planning a big renovation next month. I heard some of the staff might be let go. They haven't decided who yet." Maya felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Losing this job wasn't an option, she had no backup plan, no safety net. "I hadn't heard. Thanks for the heads up, Sarah. Don't worry too much, Maya. You're one of the best here. I'm sure they'll keep you on," Sarah said, offering a reassuring smile before heading back to the front. But Maya couldn't shake the anxiety that had settled in her chest. The thought of losing her job, of not being able to provide for Jaden, was too much to bear. She had to keep going, no matter what. Scene 4, Mr. Langston's kind gesture. The rest of the day passed in a blur of orders, dishes, and the constant hum of conversation. By the time the lunch rush had died down, Maya was running on fumes. She glanced at the clock, just a few more hours until she could go home to Jaden. As she cleared away the plates from Mr. Langston's table, she noticed something unusual, a larger-than-usual tip resting beside his empty coffee cup. And next to it, a small note folded neatly in half. Curious, Maya picked up the note, glancing around to make sure no one was watching before unfolding it. "Thank you for your excellent service, Maya. Your kindness does not go unnoticed. E.L." Maya felt a lump form in her throat as she read the note. It was a simple message, but it carried a weight of gratitude that she hadn't expected. She slipped the note into her pocket, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. In that small moment, she felt seen, appreciated in a way that went beyond the usual interactions she had with customers. As she finished clearing the table, Maya couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. Maybe things weren't as bleak as they seemed. Maybe there were still small blessings to be found, even in the hardest of days. Scene 5, Returning Home. By the time Maya walked through the door of her apartment that evening, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. But despite the weariness, she felt a small spark of hope, a glimmer that had been missing for too long. "Mama!" Jaden's voice called out as he ran to greet her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Maya smiled, ruffling his hair as she hugged him back. "Hey there, buddy. How was your day?" "It was good. We learned about space in school today. Did you know that some stars are bigger than the sun?" Jaden's eyes lit up with excitement as he spoke. "That's amazing, Jaden. You'll have to tell me all about it later," Maya replied, her heart swelling with love for her son. As they settled into their evening routine, dinner, homework, and a bedtime story, Maya found herself thinking about Mr. Langston's note again. After Jaden had fallen asleep, she pulled it out of her pocket, reading it once more before placing it in a drawer beside her bed, where she kept other cherished keepsakes. Lying in bed, Maya reflected on the day, on the small acts of kindness that had brightened it despite the challenges. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, there were still bills to pay, uncertainties to face, but for now, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. For Jaden's sake, she would keep going, no matter what. As sleep finally claimed her, Maya's last thought was of Mr. Langston's quiet kindness, a small light in the darkness of her daily grind. Chapter 2, Connections Deepen. Scene 1, An Unexpected Conversation. Maya walked into the restaurant the next morning, her mind still lingering on the note and generous tip Mr. Langston had left the day before. She felt a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Why had he chosen to reach out to her in this way? As she tied her apron and prepared for her shift, she made a quiet decision: today, she would thank him properly. The morning rush began as usual, with Maya moving from table to table, her smile in place despite the nagging worry about the restaurant's impending renovations. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, she spotted Mr. Langston entering the restaurant. He nodded at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips as he made his way to his usual table by the window. Maya took a deep breath and approached him, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Langston," she greeted him warmly, pouring his coffee. "The usual?" "Yes, please," he replied, his voice as calm and measured as ever. He looked up at her, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps. Maya hesitated, then spoke up. "I wanted to thank you for the note you left yesterday. It meant a lot to me." Mr. Langston nodded slightly, his gaze steady. "You're welcome, Maya. I've noticed how hard you work, how kind you are to everyone who comes in here. It's rare." Maya was taken aback by his words. Mr. Langston was usually so reserved, so guarded. "I just try to do my best," she said modestly. "It's not always easy, but I want to set a good example for my son." At the mention of her son, Mr. Langston's expression softened. "You're a mother. That explains a lot." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Yes, Jaden is my world. Everything I do is for him." For a moment, silence settled between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. Then, Mr. Langston cleared his throat, his voice quieter now. "I had a daughter once. She was, very much like you. Kind, hardworking, always thinking of others." Maya's heart ached at the sadness in his tone. "I'm sorry," she said softly, unsure of what else to say. Mr. Langston gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you. It was a long time ago, but, some things never leave you." Maya wanted to ask more, to offer some comfort, but she could see that Mr. Langston had retreated back into himself. The brief glimpse into his past, into his pain, was enough to deepen the bond between them. She realized that beneath his reserved exterior, he was a man carrying a heavy burden, much like herself. "I'll bring your order right out," Maya said, sensing that the conversation had reached its natural end. As she walked away, she couldn't help but think about how much more there was to Mr. Langston than she had ever realized. Their brief exchange left her feeling closer to him, understanding now that he, too, had his own struggles, his own sorrows. Scene 2, Jaden's school trouble. Later that day, as the lunch rush began to die down, Maya took a moment to check her phone. Her heart sank when she saw a missed call and a voicemail from Jaden's school. She quickly dialed the number, anxiety gnawing at her as she waited for someone to answer. "Hello, this is Mrs. Thompson, the school counselor. Is this Maya Carter?" "Yes, this is Maya," she replied, her voice tight with worry. "Is everything okay with Jaden?" Mrs. Thompson sighed softly. "Jaden's been having a bit of trouble in class lately. His teacher noticed that he seems distracted and anxious. We're concerned that he might be struggling with something at home." Maya's heart clenched. She knew that Jaden had been more withdrawn lately, but she hadn't realized it was affecting him at school. "I'll talk to him," she said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, Maya leaned against the wall, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. Was her long hours at work and the constant stress spilling over onto Jaden? She knew she had to find a way to be there for him more, but with the threat of losing her job looming, she felt trapped. That evening, as she tucked Jaden into bed, she sat down beside him, her heart heavy. "Jaden, sweetie, can we talk?" Jaden looked up at her, his big brown eyes filled with innocence. "Sure, Mama. What's wrong?" "I heard from your school today," Maya began gently. "They said you've been feeling a little anxious lately. Is something bothering you?" Jaden hesitated, then nodded. "I just miss you, Mama. You're always working, and sometimes I feel lonely." Maya's heart broke at his words. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. "Oh, Jaden, I'm so sorry. I'm doing my best to make sure we're okay, but I never want you to feel lonely. I love you more than anything, and I'm going to find a way to spend more time with you. I promise." Jaden hugged her tightly, and Maya held him for a long time, her mind racing with thoughts of how she could balance her responsibilities as a mother and her need to provide for them. She knew she had to make a change, for both their sakes. Scene 3, The Offer. The next morning, Maya returned to work, her conversation with Jaden weighing heavily on her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about how she could be there for him more, even as she faced the uncertainty of her job. When Mr. Langston arrived and took his usual seat, Maya approached him with a warm smile, but her mind was elsewhere. "Maya," Mr. Langston began after she served his coffee, his voice gentle. "You seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Maya hesitated, then decided to be honest. "It's just, my son, Jaden. He's been having a hard time at school, and I feel like I'm not there for him enough. But with work and everything, I don't know how to fix it." Mr. Langston regarded her thoughtfully for a moment. "Maya, you've been a bright spot in my days here. I'd like to help, if you'll allow me." Maya blinked in surprise. "Help? How?" "I could offer to cover your wages for a few days," he suggested calmly. "Take some time off to be with your son. Focus on him. I've been blessed with enough that I can afford to do this for you, and I want to." Maya was stunned. "Mr. Langston, that's incredibly generous, but I don't know if I can accept that." Mr. Langston gave her a reassuring smile. "There's no need to decide right now. Just think about it. Sometimes, we all need a little help, and I'd be honored if you'd let me offer that to you." Maya didn't know what to say. The offer was more than she could have ever expected, and it touched her deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. I'll think about it." As she walked away, she felt a whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, uncertainty, and a deep sense of the connection that was growing between them. But accepting his offer would mean relying on someone else, something she wasn't used to. She needed time to think, to decide what was best for her and Jaden. Scene 4, A Mother's Decision. That evening, Maya sat down with Jaden after dinner, her mind made up. She had spent the day thinking about Mr. Langston's offer, and she knew what she had to do. "Jaden," she began gently, "how would you feel if Mama took a few days off work so we could spend more time together?" Jaden's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? We could play, and read, and maybe even go to the park." Maya smiled, her heart warming at his enthusiasm. "Yes, all of that. I talked to someone at work who's willing to help us out so I can be with you." Jaden's smile faded slightly. "But what about your job? I don't want you to lose it because of me." Maya hugged him tightly. "You're more important than any job, Jaden. And we're going to be okay. I promise." For the next few days, Maya took Mr. Langston up on his offer. She stayed home with Jaden, helping him with his schoolwork, playing games, and taking him to the park. The time they spent together was precious, and Maya could see the difference it made in Jaden's mood. He was happier, more relaxed, and she felt a deep sense of contentment that she hadn't felt in a long time. By the end of the week, Maya knew she had made the right decision. Accepting help didn't mean she was weak, it meant she was doing what was best for her son. And for that, she was grateful. Scene 5, Returning to Work. When Maya returned to work, she felt rejuvenated, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She approached Mr. Langston's table with a heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Mr. Langston," she said sincerely as she poured his coffee. "The time I spent with Jaden, it made all the difference. I can't thank you enough." Mr. Langston nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "I'm glad to hear that, Maya. Sometimes, a little time and attention is all we need to make things right." As the day went on, the restaurant buzzed with activity. Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that she was doing everything she could for her son. But her sense of stability was shaken when she overheard a conversation between the manager and another staff member about the upcoming layoffs. "They're going to start cutting staff once the renovations begin," the manager said, his voice hushed but serious. "We don't have the budget to keep everyone on." Maya's heart sank. The threat of losing her job was no longer just a distant worry, it was becoming a very real possibility. She tried to focus on her work, but the anxiety gnawed at her, reminding her that the future was uncertain. As she served the last of her tables, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of the impending changes. She had found hope in Mr. Langston's kindness and the time she had spent with Jaden, but now, more than ever, she needed to prepare for what lay ahead. The chapter ended with Maya feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety, knowing that her time at the restaurant might be coming to an end. She would need to find a way to protect the life she had built for herself and her son, no matter what challenges came her way. Chapter 3, The Final Days. Scene 1, The Announcement. The tension in the restaurant was palpable as the staff gathered for the morning meeting. Maya stood near the back, her arms crossed, trying to keep her nerves in check. She knew what was coming, the renovations had been the talk of the staff for weeks now, and the rumors of layoffs had only added to her anxiety. The manager, Mr. Peterson, stood at the front, his expression serious. "I know many of you have heard about the upcoming renovations," he began, his voice steady but lacking any warmth. "Today, I have to confirm that these renovations will require us to make some difficult decisions. Unfortunately, this means we will have to let some of you go." Maya felt her stomach drop. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "We're going to do everything we can to help those affected," Mr. Peterson continued, "but I want to be clear, this isn't a reflection of your performance. It's simply a matter of business. Maya exchanged glances with Sarah, who was standing next to her. The fear in her friend's eyes mirrored her own. How would she continue to support Jaden if she lost this job? The thought of being without work terrified her. "We'll be having individual meetings with each of you over the next week to discuss your positions," Mr. Peterson added before dismissing them to start their shifts. Maya walked away from the meeting feeling numb. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her, and the pressure to find a way to support her son seemed more overwhelming than ever. She knew she had to stay strong, but the fear gnawed at her, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Scene 2, Mr. Langston's Confession. The day dragged on as Maya went through the motions of serving customers, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of what she would do if she lost her job. By the time the evening rolled around, the restaurant had quieted down, and Maya found herself alone with Mr. Langston, who was finishing his dinner at his usual table by the window. She approached him to clear his plate, her mind still buzzing with worry. "How was everything tonight, Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice tinged with fatigue. "It was excellent, as always," he replied, his gaze lingering on her. "But you seem troubled, Maya. Is something on your mind?" Maya hesitated, then decided to open up to him. "It's just, they announced today that there will be layoffs because of the renovations. I'm worried about what's going to happen, how I'll manage if I lose my job." Mr. Langston nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. It's not easy, facing such uncertainty." Maya sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I just don't know what I'll do if I lose this job. Jaden depends on me, and I've worked so hard to keep things stable for us." There was a long pause as Mr. Langston seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Maya," he began softly, "I haven't told you much about my life, but I think it's time I shared something with you." Maya looked at him curiously, sensing that this was important. "I had a daughter," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She was everything to me, kind, compassionate, and full of life. But I lost her in a car accident many years ago. It was the most painful thing I've ever experienced." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. She had always sensed a sadness in Mr. Langston, but hearing this brought it into sharp focus. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, not knowing what else to say. Mr. Langston nodded, his gaze distant. "Thank you. The reason I'm telling you this is because, in you, I see a lot of her. Your kindness, your dedication, it reminds me of who she was." Maya's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected this, but it made sense now, the quiet way he had observed her, the way he had reached out to help. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Langston replied, his voice steady. "I just wanted you to know that you've brought some light back into my life. And I want to help you, in whatever way I can." Maya nodded, overwhelmed by the depth of his kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. That means more to me than you know." Scene 3, A Last Gift. As the week progressed, the tension in the restaurant grew with each passing day. The individual meetings had begun, and Maya knew it was only a matter of time before she was called in. She tried to keep her spirits up, but the uncertainty was eating away at her. On what she feared might be her last day at the restaurant, Maya served Mr. Langston his usual dinner, her heart heavy with the thought that this could be the last time they spoke. As she set his plate down, Mr. Langston looked up at her with a small, sad smile. "Maya, would you mind sitting with me for a moment?" Maya blinked in surprise. "Of course," she replied, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. Mr. Langston reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, placing it on the table between them. "I want you to have this," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Maya stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "It's something that I hope will help you, no matter what happens with your job," he explained. "But I ask that you wait until after your shift to open it." Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion. Mr. Langston smiled gently. "You deserve it, Maya. You've brought kindness and warmth into my life, and I want to do something for you in return." The rest of the evening passed in a blur as Maya focused on finishing her shift. The envelope weighed heavily in her pocket, a reminder of the kindness Mr. Langston had shown her. She couldn't stop wondering what was inside, but she respected his request to wait. As the last customer left and the restaurant began to close down, Maya finally allowed herself to take a moment. She slipped into the back room, where she could be alone, and pulled out the envelope. With trembling hands, she carefully opened it, revealing a letter written in Mr. Langston's neat handwriting, along with a check. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the amount. It was enough to change her life, enough to secure Jaden's future and give them both the stability she had longed for. She read the letter, tears streaming down her face as she took in Mr. Langston's words. He explained how much her kindness had meant to him, how she had reminded him of the daughter he had lost. He wrote that he wanted to help her build a better life, and this was his way of giving back some of the light she had brought into his world. Maya clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his gift. She had never expected anything like this, and the realization that someone cared enough to help her in this way left her speechless. Scene 4, The Revelation. Maya returned home that night, still reeling from what had happened. She found Jaden waiting for her, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Mama, you're home," he exclaimed, running to her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Maya hugged him tightly, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "I'm home, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As she tucked Jaden into bed later that night, she sat beside him, stroking his hair. "Jaden, I want to tell you something," she began softly. Jaden looked up at her, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it, Mama?" "There's a man at the restaurant where I work," Maya explained, "a very kind man named Mr. Langston. He's been coming there every day, and he's helped me in ways I never expected." Jaden listened intently, his expression serious. "Is he the one who gave you the envelope?" Maya nodded, smiling through her tears. "Yes, he is. And inside that envelope was something very special, something that's going to help us a lot." "What was it?" Jaden asked, his voice filled with wonder. "It was a gift," Maya replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "A gift that's going to make sure we're okay, no matter what happens." Jaden smiled, his eyes bright with happiness. "That's good, Mama. I'm glad." Maya kissed his forehead, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "Me too, baby. Me too." Scene 5, A New Dawn. The next morning, Maya woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. The first thing she did was call the school to arrange a meeting with Jaden's teacher. She wanted to make sure he had all the support he needed to succeed. After that, she decided to visit Mr. Langston's home to thank him personally for everything he had done for her. She knew it was the right thing to do, to express her gratitude and let him know how much his kindness had meant to her. As she stood outside the grand, stately home, Maya took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She rang the doorbell, her heart pounding in her chest. A somber-looking housekeeper answered the door, her expression grave. "May I help you?" she asked politely. "I'm here to see Mr. Langston," Maya replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to thank him for something he did for me." The housekeeper's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I'm afraid you're too late, dear. Mr. Langston passed away last night." Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the words sank in. "Passed away," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The housekeeper nodded, her gaze sympathetic. "Yes, it was peaceful, in his sleep. He had been unwell for some time, but he never wanted to trouble anyone with it." Maya stood there, stunned, as the reality of what had happened settled over her. Mr. Langston's final act had been to help her, to give her the chance at a better life, and then he had quietly slipped away. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the depth of his kindness, the weight of the gift he had given her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for letting me know." As she walked away from the house, Maya felt a profound sense of loss, mixed with overwhelming gratitude. Mr. Langston had touched her life in a way she could never have imagined, and she knew she would carry his memory with her always. Chapter 4, The Final Farewell. Scene 1, The Visit. Maya stood outside Mr. Langston's grand, stately home, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to thank him for his incredible generosity, but now she was filled with a sense of foreboding. The house, normally so imposing, seemed even more so today, its windows dark and its doors closed as if it were holding a secret within. Taking a deep breath, Maya rang the doorbell. The chime echoed through the empty halls, and she waited, her anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, the door opened to reveal a somber-looking housekeeper, her expression grave. "May I help you?" the housekeeper asked politely, her tone soft. Maya swallowed hard. "I'm here to see Mr. Langston. I wanted to thank him for something he did for me." The housekeeper's expression softened, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. "I'm afraid you're too late, dear. Mr. Langston passed away last night." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. "Passed away," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The housekeeper nodded, her gaze sympathetic. "Yes, it was peaceful, in his sleep. He had been unwell for some time, but he never wanted to trouble anyone with it." Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The news was too much to process all at once. Mr. Langston, the man who had shown her such kindness, was gone. And his final act had been to give her a chance at a better life. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as the reality of the situation sank in. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "Thank you for letting me know." The housekeeper nodded, her expression understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss, dear. He spoke very highly of you." Maya stood there for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She had come here to express her gratitude, but now all she could feel was a deep, overwhelming sense of loss. Mr. Langston had changed her life, and she hadn't even had the chance to thank him properly. "I'm so sorry," the housekeeper said again, her voice filled with compassion. "If there's anything I can do." Maya shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "No, thank you. I need a moment." The housekeeper gave her a gentle pat on the arm before retreating back inside, leaving Maya alone on the doorstep. For a long moment, Maya stood there, letting the tears flow, mourning the loss of the man who had been a quiet, constant presence in her life. Scene 2, The Will. A few days later, Maya received an unexpected phone call from Mr. Langston's attorney, requesting her presence at the reading of his will. The news surprised her. She had never imagined that Mr. Langston would include her in such personal matters. But as she sat in the attorney's office, she began to understand just how much she had meant to him. The attorney, a kind and elderly man with a gentle demeanor, began reading the will, outlining the distribution of Mr. Langston's estate. Maya listened in silence, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. And finally, the attorney said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, Mr. Langston wished to leave a portion of his estate to Miss Maya Carter, in recognition of the kindness and comfort she brought to his life in his final years. Maya's breath caught in her throat as the attorney continued. "Mr. Langston has left you a substantial sum of money, Miss Carter, as well as a trust fund for your son, Jaden. He wanted to ensure that you and your son would be taken care of, and that you could pursue your dreams without the burden of financial worries." Tears filled Maya's eyes as she listened, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Mr. Langston's generosity. The gift was far more than she had ever expected, more than she had ever dared to hope for. The attorney finished reading the will and looked up at Maya, his expression gentle. "I know this must be a lot to take in, Miss Carter, but Mr. Langston was very clear in his wishes. He wanted you to know how much your kindness meant to him. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had never imagined that her simple acts of kindness could have such a profound impact on someone's life. And now, Mr. Langston's final act had irrevocably changed her own life in ways she could hardly comprehend. "Thank you," Maya finally whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for everything." The attorney smiled kindly. "You were a light in his life, Miss Carter. And now he's passed that light on to you." Scene 3, saying goodbye. A few days later, Maya found herself standing in front of Mr. Langston's grave, her heart heavy with grief and gratitude. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Maya had come here to say her final goodbye, to express the gratitude she hadn't been able to share with him in person. She knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of his name. "Mr. Langston," she began softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I hope you can." Tears filled her eyes as she continued. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me and Jaden. Your kindness, it's changed our lives in ways I can't even begin to explain. I wish I could have told you this in person, but I hope you know how much it means to us." Maya wiped away a tear, her heart aching with the loss. "I promise I'll use your gift wisely. I'll make sure Jaden has the future you wanted for him, and I'll pursue my own dreams too. You've given us a second chance, and I'll do everything I can to honor your memory." She stayed there for a long time, talking to Mr. Langston as if he were right there beside her, sharing her hopes, her fears, and her gratitude. It was a cathartic release, a way to process the overwhelming emotions that had been building up since his passing. When she finally rose to leave, Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had said her goodbyes, and though the pain of his loss would never fully fade, she knew that he would always be with her in spirit, guiding her as she moved forward. Scene 4, a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Maya set to work putting Mr. Langston's gift to use. The first thing she did was enroll Jaden in a better school, one that could offer him the support and opportunities he needed to thrive. Seeing the excitement on his face as they toured the campus filled her heart with joy. "Mama, this school is amazing!" Jaden exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder as they explored the classrooms and playground. "I can't wait to start." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm so happy for you, Jaden. You're going to do great things here." But Maya didn't stop there. She also took steps to pursue her own dreams. With the financial security Mr. Langston had provided, she enrolled in night classes at the local community college, determined to earn her degree and build a better future for herself and her son. It wasn't easy balancing school, work, and motherhood, but Maya was more determined than ever. She knew that this was her chance to create the life she had always dreamed of, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As the weeks turned into months, Maya and Jaden's lives began to transform. Their small apartment was filled with laughter and hope, the once overwhelming weight of financial stress now a distant memory. And through it all, Maya kept Mr. Langston's memory close, drawing strength from the kindness he had shown her. Scene 5, the final reflection. 1 year later, Maya found herself sitting in the same restaurant where she had once served Mr. Langston every day. But this time, she wasn't a waitress, she was a customer, enjoying a quiet meal with Jaden by her side. As they sat at the table by the window, Maya looked out at the bustling city streets, her heart filled with a sense of peace and contentment. So much had changed in the past year, and yet, in many ways, everything had fallen into place exactly as it was meant to. "Mama, do you think Mr. Langston can see us from heaven?" Jaden asked, his voice filled with childlike curiosity. Maya smiled, her eyes misting with tears. "I think so, Jaden. I think he's watching over us, and he's proud of everything we've done." Jaden nodded thoughtfully, his face serious. "I hope so. I want him to know how much he helped us." Maya reached across the table, taking Jaden's hand in hers. "I'm sure he knows, sweetie. And I'm sure he's happy that we're doing so well." As they finished their meal, Maya couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. It had been filled with challenges and heartbreak, but it had also been filled with love, kindness, and unexpected blessings. And as she sat there, holding Jaden's hand, Maya knew that she had been given a second chance at life, a chance that she would never take for granted. Mr. Langston had shown her the power of kindness, and she was determined to carry that lesson with her, spreading light and love wherever she went. The story ended with Maya and Jaden leaving the restaurant, stepping out into the bright sunlight of a new day. They walked hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that they were not alone. And in her heart, Maya carried the memory of Mr. Langston, the man who had touched her life in ways she would never forget.